The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, casting gentle shadows across the quiet room. He sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, a lukewarm cup of coffee held between his hands, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. Outside, the world moved on as it always did. Cars hummed past the streets, neighbors greeted each other with familiar smiles, and life went about its rhythm. Yet inside, everything was still, almost reverent in its silence. He had come to learn that these quiet moments carried more weight than any loud proclamation could ever offer. They were spaces where true understanding of oneself could emerge, where reflection could happen without interruption, and where the subtle lessons of life began to settle deep within the mind. Months earlier, the world had seemed heavier than he could bear. Every plan he had made, every goal he had set seemed to collapse under invisible pressures. Friends who had promised support disappeared when he most needed them. Opportunities he thought were secure slipped through his fingers like grains of sand, leaving him with nothing tangible to hold on to. At first, the silence felt like an enemy, a reminder of his isolation and his inability to control circumstances. But slowly, as days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, he began to notice the hidden power in it. Silence forced him to face himself fully, without distraction or escape. In its stillness, he could hear the echoes of his own thoughts, feel the tremors of his fears, and yet, gradually, learn to recognize his own strength. Failure had a way of teaching quietly, almost imperceptibly. He recalled one particular project, something he had poured months of effort into, only to have it rejected outright. The sting of disappointment had been sharp, almost unbearable. At the time, it felt like proof that he was incapable, that his efforts were meaningless. But now, in the calm of a morning that offered no judgment, he could see that the rejection had been a teacher, a guide toward a deeper form of resilience. The lessons were subtle: patience, persistence, humility, and the understanding that growth often comes in forms unseen by the world. He reached for his notebook, a small, worn companion that had traveled with him through countless days of uncertainty. He began to write, not for anyone else to read, but for himself, to give form to thoughts that had otherwise remained shapeless in the quiet corners of his mind. Each word, carefully chosen, seemed to carry weight beyond its letters. The act of writing became meditative, an anchor against the waves of self-doubt that threatened to overwhelm him. He noted down small victories: a task completed despite resistance, a conversation handled with patience, a moment of courage in the face of fear. These were not grand achievements, but in the silence they became monumental, each one a brick in the foundation of strength he was quietly building. Outside, a leaf drifted lazily from the branch of a tree, spinning slightly before landing softly on the ground. He watched it, captivated by its gentle descent. In that simple motion, he found a metaphor for his own journey. Growth did not always announce itself with fanfare or visible markers. Often it happened incrementally, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day it became undeniable. The hours spent reflecting, the nights spent wrestling with fears and doubts, the days of patient effort with no recognition, these were the true markers of progress. And though they went unseen by most, they mattered profoundly. As he sipped his coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him in the moment, he thought of the friends and colleagues who had once doubted him, the opportunities that had been lost, and the failures that had cut deeply. Each of these, he realized, was a step along a path that was uniquely his own. The lessons learned in silence were lessons no one else could teach. They required patience, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront discomfort without seeking immediate relief. In this quiet contemplation, he discovered a resilience that was not flashy or loud, but steady, reliable, and enduring. He began to outline his plans for the day, not with urgency, but with deliberation. Each task, each step was considered carefully, weighed against his priorities and capabilities. He understood now that rushing to prove himself to others was pointless. Validation from outside sources was fleeting and unreliable. The real work, the work that truly mattered, was internal, silent, and ongoing. As he wrote, he felt a subtle shift within himself, a growing sense of control over his own life and choices, grounded not in external approval, but in the quiet knowledge of his own perseverance. Memories of nights spent awake, consumed by worry and self-reproach surfaced. He had once believed that success could only be measured by visible accomplishments or accolades, but those assumptions had crumbled under the weight of experience. In silence, he had learned a more profound metric: the steadiness of his own presence, the consistency of his effort, and the depth of understanding he brought to each challenge. Strength, he realized, was not the absence of fear or failure, but the ability to move forward in spite of them. The morning hours passed, gentle and unhurried. He reflected on the small habits he had developed: the quiet journaling, the mindful observation of his surroundings, the deliberate choices that respected both his limitations and his aspirations. In this sustained effort, he found a rhythm that felt natural and empowering. The noise of the world, with its endless demands and distractions, faded in comparison to the clarity and focus offered by silence. Each small act of intentional living was a testament to the strength that grew unseen, a reminder that the most meaningful progress often escapes immediate recognition. By the time the sun had risen fully, filling the room with warm light, he closed his notebook. The act was simple, almost mundane, yet profoundly satisfying. He had confronted doubt, processed past mistakes, and acknowledged quiet victories. The strength he had nurtured in the unseen hours of reflection felt tangible now, anchored in both thought and action. He realized that the world might never notice these efforts, but that did not diminish their value. Real growth did not require acknowledgement. It required commitment, patience, and the willingness to endure when recognition was absent. Sitting back, he let out a deep breath, feeling the subtle but unmistakable shift that comes with acceptance and understanding. Silence, he reflected, had not been his enemy, but his guide. It had forced him to look inward, to grapple with his own fears and uncertainties, and to emerge with a steadiness that no external circumstance could erode. The quiet moments, once daunting and uncomfortable, had become the crucible in which his inner strength was forged. And as the morning wore on, he understood the profound truth that had slowly revealed itself. Real strength is built not in the applause of others, not in the visible markers of success, but in the silent hours where persistence, patience, and introspection converge. Every failure endured, every fear faced, every quiet effort made in solitude contributed to a foundation stronger than any external reward could provide. In this realization, he found peace, purpose, and an unwavering sense of confidence in the path he was quietly carving for himself. The day had begun in stillness, and stillness remained, yet it was no longer empty or oppressive. It was alive with meaning, imbued with the lessons of hardship and the quiet victories of perseverance. He understood now that silence was not a void to be feared, but a space where the most important work of life could unfold, where inner resilience was nurtured, and where real strength, steady, enduring, and invisible to the world, was born. The afternoon sun cast a gentle glow over the streets, warming the pavement and the quiet sidewalks he walked along. Each step was measured, unhurried, as though the act of walking itself demanded reflection. Life had taught him that rushing through moments often caused them to pass unnoticed, and so he moved deliberately, letting each sensation, each sound, each movement settle into his awareness. The distant hum of traffic, the laughter of children in a far-off yard, the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, all of it became part of the tapestry of his inner contemplation. There was beauty in noticing, in being present, in letting the world unfold slowly around him while he remained steady within. He thought back to the months when life had felt relentless, when every failure seemed magnified by the silence that followed it. At first, he had despised the quiet, believing that it was a sign of neglect, of being unseen and unheard. Friends had stopped reaching out, opportunities had faded, and the absence of external validation had been painful. But now, walking through this calm neighborhood, he could see the lessons hidden within those experiences. Silence had not been empty, it had been formative.
It had forced him to confront the truth of his own resilience, to understand that worth and growth were not contingent upon the acknowledgement of others. Each failure, he realized, carried with it the seeds of strength. He remembered projects that had collapsed despite his best efforts, ideas that had been dismissed, moments where rejection had stung painfully. At the time, it had felt devastating, a reflection of personal inadequacy. But over time, he recognized that the pain had been essential. It had sharpened his discernment, deepened his patience, and cultivated a quiet confidence that no external praise could replicate. The world had taught him through absence and difficulty, and he had listened. As he continued walking, he passed a small park tucked between buildings, its grass still lush despite the dry spell. A bench sat empty beneath a tree, inviting him to pause. He sat down, feeling the slight give of the weathered wood beneath him, and watched as a pair of birds flitted among the branches. Their movements were light, unhurried, and purposeful. He reflected on how the smallest beings often carried their purpose without fanfare, without seeking recognition, yet their actions contributed to the rhythm of life in meaningful ways. In that observation, he saw a parallel to his own journey. Small, deliberate acts, performed consistently in silence, accumulate into resilience and eventual growth. He recalled the long nights spent awake with worries that seemed insurmountable. Anxiety had often gripped him, its invisible weight pressing down relentlessly, whispering doubts about his capabilities, his worth, and the future. In those moments, he had learned to sit with discomfort rather than flee from it. The act of staying present, of acknowledging the fear and allowing it to exist without succumbing to panic, became a practice of quiet courage. He realized that true bravery was not in dramatic gestures, but in the simple persistence to continue, to endure, and to face what others might avoid. The park around him remained tranquil. A gentle wind stirred the branches above, carrying with it the faint scent of grass and earth. Inhaling deeply, he felt a sense of clarity emerging from the stillness. He began to journal once more, capturing the thoughts that arose, reflections on patience, on the lessons of delayed gratification, and on the subtleties of personal growth. Words flowed easily now, unhurried, carrying with them the depth of understanding that had been honed over months of silent contemplation. Each sentence was a bridge linking past struggles with emerging insights, connecting failure to future possibilities. He thought about relationships, friends, family, colleagues, and the ways in which silence had reshaped his understanding of them. The absence of superficial interaction had forced him to consider the value of genuine connection. He understood that relationships required intention and presence, not constant noise or performance. In the quiet months, he had learned to listen deeply, to offer support without expectation, and to appreciate the unspoken bonds that strengthened over time. He realized that growth was not only internal, but relational, and that quiet effort could nurture connections more effectively than any loud or dramatic display. Continuing his walk, he observed a small garden tucked behind a fence. Flowers, vibrant yet unassuming, grew amidst weeds and uneven soil. They thrived quietly, doing what they were meant to do, without concern for recognition. He marveled at their resilience, finding in them a metaphor for his own life. Like the flowers, he had endured harsh conditions, unexpected neglect, and challenging seasons, yet growth had persisted. Strength had taken root in the silent spaces, nurtured by patience and sustained effort, eventually manifesting in subtle, meaningful ways. He paused at a street corner, watching a few pedestrians pass. Each person moved with purpose, yet each carried their own burdens, invisible to others. The thought reminded him that struggle is universal, often hidden beneath the surface, and that appearances rarely reflect the quiet victories occurring within individuals. In a world obsessed with outward displays of success, he found solace in knowing that his efforts, though unseen, were significant. The invisible work, the patient dedication, and the resilience cultivated in solitude were the truest measures of personal strength. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, he returned home, carrying with him a renewed sense of focus and calm. He prepared a modest meal, each step intentional, mindful of the present. Even the act of cooking became a meditation, a ritual of self-care, an acknowledgement of the small but meaningful aspects of daily life. He ate slowly, savoring flavors and textures, recognizing that attention to these seemingly ordinary moments contributed to a deeper sense of well-being and inner stability. Sitting down afterward, he reflected on the cumulative lessons of the day: patience, observation, endurance, and the quiet acknowledgement of small victories. These principles, honed through months of silent struggle, formed the core of his resilience. He understood that visible milestones in life were fleeting and often unreliable indicators of growth. True development, he realized, occurs in the spaces where silence meets persistence and where conscious reflection transforms adversity into strength. The day drew to a close, and shadows lengthened across his room. In the dim light, he picked up his notebook once more and wrote about the journey he had undertaken, not the dramatic moments, but the incremental steps, the patient endurance, and the quiet victories that shaped him. He recognized that silence, though at times uncomfortable, had become an invaluable teacher. It had allowed him to confront fear, embrace patience, and cultivate a steadfastness that no external validation could provide. As he set the notebook aside, he felt a subtle shift within himself, a deep, calm certainty that had not existed months ago. The quiet struggle had borne fruit, manifested not in accolades or recognition, but in the strength and clarity he now carried. He understood that life's challenges, though unrelenting, were also opportunities for introspection, growth, and the development of a resilient spirit. True power, he reflected, was forged in these silent hours, built steadily and intentionally, layer upon layer, beyond the gaze of the world. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the stillness of the room and the sense of completion it offered. The lessons of patience, reflection, and quiet perseverance had taken root, and though life would continue to present challenges, he now approached them with calm, focus, and the understanding that true strength is cultivated gradually, quietly, and intentionally. In this realization, he found both peace and purpose, a sense of readiness to face tomorrow with measured courage and unwavering commitment to his own growth.
Evening settled softly over the city, the sky painted in muted shades of amber and deepening blue. The room was bathed in this gentle light, a quiet companion to the stillness he had carried all day. He sat once again at his desk, notebook open, pen in hand, allowing thoughts to flow freely onto the pages. The act of writing had become more than reflection. It was a ritual of understanding, a way to translate the silent work of the mind into something tangible, something enduring. The months of struggle and introspection, the failures and moments of doubt had all led to this understanding, that real strength is cultivated in quiet, often unseen, and always deliberate effort. As he wrote, he traced the path he had traveled, the small victories, the patient endurance, and the resilience that had slowly emerged. Every rejection, every misstep, every moment of feeling unseen had been a lesson, a shaping force that contributed to the foundation of his inner strength. What had once felt like isolation had become a teacher, and what had once seemed like failure had transformed into guidance. He reflected on the early mornings spent alone, the nights awake with anxiety,
and the afternoons walking through quiet streets, observing the small details of life that previously went unnoticed. Those moments, seemingly ordinary, had become extraordinary in their impact. The subtle beauty of the world, the way light shifted across the walls, the delicate sway of a branch, the resilience of a flower blooming despite neglect, had shown him that strength often manifests quietly. It is in persistence, patience, and attention to the unnoticed that character is forged. Looking back, he saw the pattern of his own growth emerging clearly. The work had been incremental, cumulative, and largely invisible. Each day had contributed a small piece to a larger whole, an unseen accumulation of resilience that now defined him. The realization was liberating. He no longer needed external validation or applause. The quiet victories, those moments of self-discipline, reflection, and deliberate action were sufficient. They were the measure of progress, the markers of meaningful change that no one else might see, but that he felt profoundly within. He considered the relationships in his life, the connections that endured and those that had faded. Silence had taught him to listen deeply, to observe with empathy, and to act with intention rather than expectation. By nurturing the bonds that mattered and letting go of those that did not, he discovered a form of relational resilience that mirrored the inner strength he was cultivating. Growth, he realized, was not purely internal. It extended outward, influencing and sustaining the lives of those around him in subtle, meaningful ways. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the room cloaked in the soft glow of twilight. Shadows lengthened, merging with the quiet he had come to cherish. He set his pen down, leaning back in his chair, and allowed himself to simply be. In the calm, he recognized the immense value of stillness, how it had provided the space for reflection, the opportunity to confront fear, and the clarity to understand himself and his journey. Silence had been more than absence. It had been a forge, shaping character, fortifying resolve, and nurturing the kind of strength that endures. Memories of past hardships surfaced, not as painful reminders, but as milestones marking the path of growth. He had faced setbacks that felt insurmountable, endured periods of doubt and loneliness, and navigated the uncertainty of an unpredictable world. Yet through it all, he had remained committed to showing up for himself, to engaging with life even when recognition was absent. That commitment, nurtured in quiet perseverance, had become a source of profound confidence. He understood now that the greatest form of courage is often the willingness to continue even when the world does not watch. He glanced around the room, noting the simplicity of his surroundings, the plain desk, the notebook, the soft light, and realized that external circumstances did not define his inner state. Strength, he had learned, is an internal architecture built silently over time. Every deliberate choice, every act of patience, every moment spent observing and reflecting contributed to a structure that could withstand the pressures of life. It was not a dramatic or visible power, but it was enduring, reliable, and deeply rooted. As the night deepened, he allowed himself a moment to reflect on the totality of his journey. The challenges he had faced, the isolation he had endured, and the repeated trials had all been integral to his growth. In the quiet, he had discovered a resilience that no one could take away, a calm confidence that allowed him to face uncertainty with composure. He understood that life's difficulties, while often painful, carried within them the seeds of transformation, and that embracing those challenges in silence cultivated the kind of strength that lasts. He thought about the future, and for the first time in a long while, he did not feel anxious or uncertain. He recognized that life would continue to present obstacles, disappointments, and moments of doubt. Yet he also understood that these moments, when met with patience, reflection, and deliberate effort, would serve to reinforce the inner foundation he had built. Strength, cultivated in silence, could weather any storm, endure any challenge, and continue to grow even in unseen circumstances. Finally, he closed his notebook, setting it aside with a sense of quiet accomplishment. The day had been ordinary in its appearance, yet extraordinary in its impact. The hours spent in reflection, the patient observation, and the deliberate acts of growth had all contributed to a profound internal shift. Real strength is not measured by accolades or recognition, but by the persistence, patience, and quiet commitment one brings to life's challenges. It is built after silence, cultivated over time, and anchored in a deep understanding of oneself. He took one last deep breath, letting the calm settle fully into his being. The lessons of the day and of the months before had become clear. Life's most meaningful victories are often invisible to the outside world. They are experienced, cultivated, and recognized internally. The quiet moments, the patient endurance, and the deliberate reflection are where resilience is forged and where lasting strength is born. As he looked out at the night sky, dotted with stars shining steadily in silence, he felt a profound sense of peace. Strength, he understood, is not always loud. It does not always announce itself with fanfare or applause. Its power lies in its quiet consistency, its patient cultivation, and its enduring presence, even when unseen. And in that truth, he found both solace and purpose, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring with the confidence that comes from resilience built in silence. The room remained quiet, but he no longer feared the silence. Instead, he welcomed it as a companion, a teacher, and a witness to the inner strength that had been forged over time. And in that quiet, he understood fully and deeply that the work of building oneself, truly, meaningfully, and enduringly, is done not in the spotlight, but in the spaces where no one is watching.